$17. That's all Isabella Winters had left in the world. 17 crumpled bills clutched in her trembling hand at 11:43 on an August night so humid the air felt like breathing through wet cloth. In 12 days, her son Oliver would die. Not might die. Would die. A congenital heart defect the color of bruised plums, a valve that didn't work, a surgery that cost $200,000 that no hospital on earth would begin without payment upfront, in full, no exceptions, no mercy. She stood in the shadows near the service entrance of the sprawling Moreno mansion in Boston, her black and white maid uniform soaked through with sweat, her hands raw from bleach and industrial soap. Thunder rumbled across the city like a warning. The humidity clung to her skin like something alive and hungry. Then she heard it. A scream. Not loud. Muffled. The sound of a body hitting brick. Isabella's feet moved before her mind caught up. She rounded the corner and saw him. Marcus Webb. Vincent Moreno's nephew. 28 years old with the soft face of a man who had never been told no, who had never wanted for anything, who had decided tonight that a 17-year-old kitchen worker named Sophia belonged to him. Sophia's back was pressed against the brick wall. Marcus's hand circled her throat like a vine choking a tree. His other hand gripped the front of her dress. His suit, Italian silk, the kind that cost more than everything Isabella had owned in her entire life, was perfectly pressed despite the violence happening inside it. Sophia's eyes were wide with terror. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. No sound came out. Isabella walked toward them. Her voice cut through the humid darkness like a blade. "Let her go." Marcus turned. He was smiling. Actually smiling. His teeth were white and straight and utterly empty of anything resembling humanity. "You," he said. "The invisible maid. How perfect." He kept his hand on Sophia's throat. Isabella took another step. Her heart was a fist hammering against her ribs. "Let her go right now." "Or what?" Marcus laughed. It was the laugh of someone who had never experienced consequence. "You'll what, exactly? Call the police? They know my name. They know my family. Or you'll scream. Go ahead. Scream. Nobody here works for you. Nobody here gives a single fuck about some. I said let her go. You know what I'm thinking." Marcus stepped closer, dragging Sophia with him, her feet scraping against the brick. "I'm thinking maybe we come to an arrangement. You do exactly what I want, whenever I want it, and I make sure that sick little boy of yours gets the surgery he needs. $200,000, Isabella. That's a lot of money for a waitress who counts pennies. But for me? It's less than I spend on shoes." The photograph in Isabella's apron pocket suddenly felt like it was burning. Her late husband. James. Dead 3 years from an aneurysm that doctors said nobody could have seen coming. He had carried life insurance. $30,000. It was supposed to be enough for everything. It had barely covered the funeral and 6 months of rent. Marcus released Sophia's throat. Sophia gasped and crumpled to the ground like a marionette with cut strings. Marcus's attention was entirely on Isabella now. He stepped toward her with the slow confidence of a predator approaching prey that had already accepted its own death. "You understand what I'm saying?" His hand reached out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers were cold. "You do what I want, or Oliver never walks into that operating room. Do you understand me?" Isabella's wrist bent backward. The pain shot up her arm like fire racing through dry wood. She could feel the bones in her wrist shifting. One more twist and something would break. Something would shatter inside her the way everything else had shattered. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply looked at Marcus with a steadiness that seemed to surprise him, and she whispered, "No." In the shadows 15 feet away, in the doorway leading back into the house, Vincent Moreno watched. He stood absolutely still. Cigar smoke curled from between his lips. His dark eyes, the color of a storm-threatening sky, locked onto Isabella Winters and did not move. Vincent was 6'2". His shoulders were broad enough that doorways required him to turn slightly to pass through. His suit was charcoal gray, handmade in Naples, worth more than some people's cars. On his left wrist sat a Rolex Daytona, 18-karat gold, the hands moving with Swiss precision. A scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a thin white line that made him look like he had cried scars instead of tears. He had built an empire. Cannabis, protection rackets, gambling operations that ran from basements to penthouse suites. He had 15 men who would walk into gunfire if he asked them to. He had senators on speed dial and judges in his pocket. He had $463 million spread across accounts in 7 countries. None of it mattered right now. For the first time in 15 years, Vincent Marino was watching a woman stand between a predator and its prey, and he could not look away. Marcus twisted Isabella's wrist harder. She gasped. The sound was small, like air escaping a balloon. Her knees buckled slightly. Then footsteps appeared. Marco and Gino emerged from the interior of the house. Both men were wearing suits that cost more than Isabella's annual salary. Both men had the flat effect of people who had seen too much violence to be surprised by any of it. Marco was 34, Italian, with a tattoo of a sword running down the inside of his left arm. Gino was younger, maybe 28, with a scar tissue thickening the bridge of his nose from a fight that had ended badly for someone else. When they saw Vincent, both men stopped walking. They did not approach their boss. They did not speak. They simply stood there, waiting, watching. Vincent took the cigar from his mouth. He set it on the edge of a nearby stone planter. The smoke continued to rise, a thin grey ghost drifting upward into the humid August darkness. He walked toward Marcus and Isabella. Each step was measured. Deliberate. The kind of walk a general might use when surveying a battlefield he was about to burn to the ground. "Let her go," Vincent said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Marcus looked at his uncle. He actually smiled wider. "This doesn't concern you," Marcus said. "She's gonna be my little." Vincent's hand moved. It was faster than should have been possible for a man his size. His fingers closed around Marcus's wrist, the same wrist that was still twisted around Isabella's arm, and he squeezed. The bones made a sound like dry wood cracking. Marcus screamed. It was a high, shattered thing that echoed off the brick walls. His grip on Isabella released immediately. She stumbled forward, her wrist suddenly free, the pain still burning but the pressure gone. Vincent released Marcus's wrist. Marcus collapsed to his knees, cradling his hand against his chest, making sounds that weren't quite words. Sophia was still on the ground, breathing in ragged gasps, her eyes wide as dinner plates. Isabella stood between them, breathing heavily, a hand rubbing her wrist, her fingers moving gently over the place where his grip had been. Vincent looked at her. Really looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. For 12 seconds, neither of them moved. The only sound was Marcus's whimpering and the distant rumble of thunder crossing the Boston skyline. Then Isabella met Vincent's eyes. In that moment, something shifted in the air between them. Something neither of them could name and neither of them would forget. Marco and Gino exchanged a look. In 15 years of working for Vincent Marino, neither man had ever seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at this woman in a maid's uniform with raw hands and a trembling wrist. Vincent turned away from Isabella without speaking. He looked at Marco. "Take Sophia to the hospital," Vincent said. His voice was quiet. "If anyone touches her, if anyone so much as speaks her name without permission, I want to know about it. Tonight. Before dawn." "Yes, boss," Marco said immediately. Vincent looked at Marcus, who was still on his knees, still whimpering, still cradling his wrist. "And get him out of my sight." Gino moved toward Marcus. Marcus crawled backward, away from Vincent, scrambling like an animal fleeing a predator that had decided, for reasons Marcus would never understand, to let him live. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning to understand how a mother with $17 and 12 days found herself standing between a monster and her own survival. 3 hours earlier, Isabella sat in a vinyl booth at the corner diner on Hanover Street, staring at a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 6 minutes ago. The photograph lay on the table in front of her. James, her husband, smiling at something she could no longer remember. The photo was worn at the edges from being held too many times by shaking hands. The doctor's words circled in her mind like vultures. $200,000. 12 days. No payment, no surgery. No surgery, no son. She pulled out her phone. Her bank account showed a balance of $16.47. She had tips from her shift at the diner, $13 in cash, crumpled bills that smelled like cigarettes and desperation. $17. She put her head down on the cold vinyl booth and, for the first time in 3 years, she prayed. $200,000. 12 days. Isabella Winters stood in the hallway of Boston Children's Hospital, her work uniform still on beneath her thin jacket, and listened to Dr. Patricia Chen's voice echo in her mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. The valve replacement surgery costs $200,000, the doctor had said, her pen tapping against the folder. Without payment up front, we cannot schedule the procedure. He has maybe 2 weeks before the valve fails completely. 2 weeks. 12 days now, because 3 had already passed since that conversation, 3 days of Isabella working double shifts at the diner on Hanover Street, 3 days of counting tips that never added up to anything, 3 days of the photograph growing softer in her apron pocket from being held too many times. She sat now in the hospital waiting room, and 6-year-old Oliver lay against her shoulder, his small body warm despite the chill she felt running through her bones. His lips were slightly blue. They had been blue for months, but she had learned to stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the weight of a stone you carry every day until someone asks if it is heavy and you realize your arms have been shaking the whole time. "Mama, when do I get my new heart part?" Oliver whispered, his fingers wrapped around her jacket. She could not answer. The words got caught somewhere between her throat and the truth, and she held him instead, breathing in the smell of his hair, trying to memorize the exact weight of him because some part of her terrified brain was already preparing for the day when he might not be heavy in her arms anymore. That was 5 days ago. Now she scrubbed marble floors on her knees in Vincent Moreno's sprawling Beacon Hill mansion, her hands raw from bleach, her uniform black and white like a chess piece, rendering her invisible to every person in the household except the other staff members, and even they looked through her most of the time. The mansion swallowed sound. Crystal chandeliers threw light across ceilings so high they seemed to belong to a different world than the one where people counted coins. The baseboards alone cost more than Isabella's monthly rent had been before she lost the apartment. Before she lost everything else. She worked the morning shift, cleaning the east wing where sunlight poured through windows the size of doors. Then the afternoon shift, polishing banisters until her fingers bled into her gloves. Then the evening shift, which was really the night shift, because in a house like this, darkness was just another room to clean. The photograph of Thomas lived in her apron pocket. She pulled it out during her lunch break in the supply closet, sitting on an overturned bucket surrounded by bottles of pine cleaner and rags that smelled like old water. Thomas was smiling at something she could no longer remember, something that had made him laugh hard enough that his eyes crinkled at the corners. That was 14 years ago. He had been alive then. He had been alive for 6 of Oliver's years, and then he had not been alive anymore, and Isabella had discovered that grief was not something that happened to you once, it was something that happened to you every single morning for the rest of your life. "I'm trying, Tom," she whispered to the photograph. "I'm trying." The supply closet smelled like chemicals and failure. She tucked the photo back into her pocket and returned to work. She had memorized the mansion's geography by her second day. The main floor with its dining room that could seat 20 people, the living rooms with their furniture that cost more than everything she had ever owned combined, the library with its walls of books nobody read. And beneath it all, accessible only by a hidden elevator behind a bookshelf that swung inward like a secret, was the underground poker room. She had seen Vincent Moreno once from a distance, moving through the main hall with two men trailing behind him like shadows made of muscle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples. A scar ran along his jaw like someone had drawn a line through his face with a blade. He wore suits that probably cost $10,000 each. He did not look at the help. Nobody like him ever did. The two men behind him wore matching expressions of absolute attention, ready to move at the slightest shift in his posture. Marco and Gino, she had heard them called. When they walked past her in the hallway, she became even more invisible than usual, her entire body collapsing into itself, trying to take up less space in the world. She calculated constantly. $17 in her pocket. $13 in cash from her shift tips, crumpled bills that smelled like cigarettes and desperation. For in her bank account if you counted the fractional cents. $200,000 needed. 12 days remaining. The mathematics of it was simple. The answer was impossible. On her 4th day at the mansion, she delivered coffee to the poker room. This was not her usual responsibility, but the housekeeping manager had called in sick, and someone had to bring the coffee down, and Isabella was efficient and quiet and would not ask questions. The hidden elevator descended. Cigar smoke hung in the air like a physical thing, like fog that smelled of money and power. Armed guards stood at every door, their eyes tracking her movements. She kept her head down, her body small, her breathing shallow. The poker room was a cathedral of masculinity. Green felt tables, stacks of chips, men in expensive suits bent over their cards like monks over scripture. The smell of whiskey and cologne and something darker underneath it all, something that made her skin prickle with warning. Vincent Moreno sat at the center table, his hand resting on a pile of chips. He was not looking at his cards. He was looking at the man across from him with an expression of such absolute calm that it took Isabella a moment to understand that this was a predator in repose, a creature that did not need to move because its prey had already decided to surrender. She set down the coffee tray. Her hands shook only slightly. When she turned to leave, she felt his eyes on her back for just a moment, and then she was out of the room, the elevator doors closing, and she was ascending back toward the world of daylight and the rest of her impossible life. 12 days. She whispered it to Oliver's video message that night, lying in the apartment she was renting month to month from a man who had already told her that if she missed next month's payment, he would change the locks. She watched the video on her cracked phone, Oliver's small voice, his small face, his small request. "Mama, when do I get my new heart part?" Soon, she told the screen, though the word felt like a lie so heavy it might sink through the floorboards. "Soon, baby. I promise. I'm trying." The rain started at midnight. She could hear it against the windows of the apartment, a steady percussion that matched the rhythm of her panic. $17. $200,000. The rain fell harder, drumming against the glass like something trying to break through, and Isabella sat in the dark and held her phone and whispered promises to a photograph and tried to imagine a mathematics in which any of this could possibly equal survival. The underground poker room of Vincent Moreno's Boston mansion held the weight of empires. Green felt tables caught the amber glow of overhead lights, and cigar smoke hung in layers thick enough to taste salt and heat and the particular electricity that comes when men with dangerous power sit down to gamble. It was just after 11 on a humid August night, the kind of night where the air itself felt like a living thing pressing against your skin, and Vincent sat at the center table with his hands folded and his expression carved from stone. He was not looking at his cards. He was watching the man across from him, one of the visiting underbosses from New York, and the absolute stillness of his posture communicated something that no words could match. Surrender was already decided. The only question was how much blood would spill before the other man accepted it. 2 floors above, Isabella Winters finished wiping down the kitchen counters for the 5th time that night, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. The photograph of Thomas pressed against her ribs through her apron pocket felt heavier than it should. 12 days. The number had become a heartbeat, a drumbeat, the only rhythm that mattered anymore. 12 days until the hospital either scheduled Oliver's surgery or removed him from the transplant list entirely. She hung her apron on the peg where it belonged and turned toward the service hallway. Her shift was done. Her feet hurt in a way that had stopped being acute pain and had become something permanent, something she carried with her like breath. That's when she heard the crying. Sophia was 17, new to the kitchen staff, still trembling at the wrong words from the wrong people. She sat on the marble floor of the service corridor, her shoulders shaking, her hands covering her face. Isabella knelt beside her instantly, muscle memory of motherhood overriding everything else. Sophia? What happened? The girl's voice came out fractured, barely held together. Marcus. Mr. Marcus. He said if I don't meet him outside in 10 minutes, he'll tell Mr. Marino I've been stealing the premium coffee. I haven't stolen anything. I swear I haven't. I need this job. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Isabella's entire body went still. She had been in the mansion long enough to understand hierarchy, to know that the men who worked for Vincent Marino existed in a different category of dangerous than ordinary men. She had also been in the mansion long enough to know that Marcus Webb, Vincent's nephew, operated as though the usual rules didn't apply to him, because in his mind, they didn't. You stay inside, Isabella said quietly. You lock yourself in the pantry and you don't come out until I come get you. Understand? But he said. I know what he said. I'll handle it. The humid darkness outside the service entrance felt like stepping into a living mouth. The air was thick enough to choke on, and the garden was illuminated only by the scattered light spilling from the mansion's windows. Marcus Webb stood near the stone fountain, smoking a cigarette with the casual contempt of someone who had never faced actual consequences, someone who believed the world had been constructed specifically for his consumption. He was 28 but had the spoiled softness of someone who had never truly wanted for anything. His designer suit cost more than Isabella made in 3 months. The gold Rolex on his wrist could have paid for a month of Oliver's medical care. When he saw her emerge instead of Sophia, his face darkened with something that looked like hunger. Where's the girl? She's not available. Isabella's voice surprised her with its steadiness. Leave her alone. Marcus stepped closer, and she could smell the cologne and cigarette smoke that clung to him like a second skin. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. You know about your son, don't you? Oliver. 6 years old. Dying. Needs $200,000 for surgery to stay alive. He smiled. I've had you researched. Isabella's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The photograph in her apron pocket suddenly felt like it was burning against her chest. Marcus continued, each word a calculated strike. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me. Information about my uncle's accounts. His schedules. His patterns. His vulnerabilities. And if you refuse, every hospital in Boston will know your son is connected to a criminal. They'll drop him from the transplant list themselves. He'll die on a waiting list in some storage room while they wait for better candidates. He paused, let that sink in. $200,000 or Oliver stops breathing. Your choice. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. I'm not helping you hurt anyone. Then your son. She didn't let him finish. Let him go. Marcus's expression shifted, and he reached past her toward the doorway where Sophia had appeared, drawn out by fear and confusion. His hand was already moving when Isabella stepped between them, her back pressed against the trembling girl, and something ancient and protective crystallized inside her chest. Let her go. Marcus laughed, a cruel sound that belonged in darker places than this garden. His hand flew up, connected with Isabella's cheekbone with a force that sent her staggering sideways. Stars exploded across her vision. She tasted blood. He raised his hand again. That's enough. The voice came from the shadows near the garden wall, calm and absolute as a death sentence. Vincent Moreno stood at the edge of the light, a cigar still burning between his fingers, his eyes moving from Marcus to Isabella with an expression that suggested he had witnessed the entire scene and had already decided what needed to happen next. Marcus froze. For a moment, he looked like a child caught with stolen candy, and then he forced a laugh that nobody believed. "Uncle Vincent, I was just, this maid was being disrespectful, and Marco. Gino." Vincent's voice didn't rise, but both men emerged from the darkness as though they had been waiting there all along. Marco was tall and built like something that had been forged in fire. Gino was smaller but moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of precise violence. "Take Sophia inside. Get her to the kitchen staff quarters. Make sure she has everything she needs." Gino's hand closed on Marcus's shoulder with absolute certainty. Sophia was already being guided back inside by Marco, who moved with the gentle care of someone who had learned kindness through long exposure to its absence. Then it was just Vincent and Isabella in the humid darkness, thunder rolling across the harbor in the distance, the storm gathering itself offshore like something preparing to strike. Vincent stepped into the light fully, and Isabella could see him clearly for the first time, really see him, not as a figure glimpsed in passing, but as a human being with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, with eyes that had seen things that couldn't be unseen, with hands that looked like they had been shaped by consequences. "Are you hurt?" Isabella touched her cheek, felt the swelling beginning, felt the sting of the cut inside her mouth. "I'm fine, Mr. Moreno. I apologize for the disturbance. I'll go." "Stay." The word wasn't a request. It was the kind of word that stopped time, and Isabella understood that refusing wasn't actually an option in any meaningful sense. He studied her face for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that suggested he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, not as a maid in a black and white uniform but as a person carrying weights that shouldn't exist. "What's your name?" "Isabella Winters, sir." "How long have you worked here, Isabella?" 3 weeks, sir." Thunder rolled again, closer now. The rain started in fat drops that fell like bullets against the stone courtyard. "Why did you protect that girl?" Vincent asked. Isabella's exhaustion broke through her carefully constructed walls. "Because someone had to. Because she's 17 and terrified and nobody else was going to stop him." Something changed in Vincent's eyes. The cold architecture cracked, just slightly, and something ancient and human looked out from behind the fortress walls. "Come inside. You're bleeding." The rain began in earnest as they walked through the garden, and by the time they reached the mansion's interior, it was falling like the sky was collapsing. Vincent led her through hallways she had never traversed, past rooms that existed in a different universe from the servants' quarters, until they reached his private study. The space was all dark wood and leather, windows overlooking the city's glittering sprawl, and it smelled like expensive cigars and old money. Isabella stood dripping on the marble floor, suddenly aware of how small she looked in this space, how completely out of place. Vincent returned with ice wrapped in cloth and pressed it gently against her cheek. His movements were careful, almost tender, and Isabella felt tears starting to burn at the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from the shock of being touched with gentleness by someone so dangerous. "Tell me what Marcus threatened you with." "It doesn't matter. I can handle." "It matters to me." Vincent's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Tell me, Isabella." And she did. She told him everything: Oliver's congenital heart condition, the valve replacement he desperately needed, the surgery that cost $200,000, the hospital's refusal to schedule without payment upfront, the 12 days ticking down like a countdown to death. She repeated the numbers as though saying them aloud might make them less impossible. 200,000. "I have $17 in my pocket." $17. "My son has 12 days. Her voice cracked on the final number. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, and when she finished, he asked only, "Oliver's father?" She pulled out the photograph with shaking hands, Thomas in his construction uniform, smiling at the camera, alive and whole in a way that felt impossible now. Vincent studied it carefully before handing it back. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of understanding loss so profound it had become part of his bone structure. "I'm going to help your son, Isabella." The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit into any rational framework. "Why? Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I'm just a maid who—" "You stood between a predator and someone weaker." Vincent's eyes held hers. "You risked everything for a girl you barely know. That's not nobody." He pulled out his phone and made a call with the casual certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed absolutely. "Dr. Chen?" "Vincent Marino. I'm sending you a payment authorization for Oliver Winters' surgery. $200,000. Schedule it for tomorrow morning." He paused, listening. "I don't care what your schedule was. Clear it. This child will have her surgery tomorrow." When he ended the call, Isabella couldn't breathe, couldn't process, couldn't do anything except stand in that study and feel her impossible world rearrange itself into something that resembled hope. That night, back in her small apartment, Isabella sat on the edge of Oliver's bed and watched him sleep. His small chest rose and fell in the darkness, and she held her phone like it was made of sacred light. The text from Dr. Chen glowed on the screen, surgery scheduled for 7 a.m. Payment received. Oliver is going to be fine. She pressed the photograph of Thomas against her heart and collapsed to her knees, finally allowing herself to sob, not from despair, but from the overwhelming arrival of grace from a place she never expected to find it. 7 hours and 43 minutes. That was how long Isabella held her breath in the waiting room of Massachusetts General Hospital, sitting in a plastic chair that had worn grooves into the back of her thighs, staring at a clock that seemed to move backward. The surgical suite on the 4th floor held her son's beating heart in someone else's hands, and she could do nothing but wait. Vincent arrived at 6 in the morning without announcement. He simply appeared in the doorway, Marco 2 steps behind him, both men still wearing the dark suits from the previous night's business. Vincent moved toward her with a deliberation that made every head in the waiting room turn. When he sat beside her, the leather of his coat creaked. He didn't speak. He simply sat, his presence a fortress of certainty while she trembled like a candle in the wind. Marco withdrew to the corner, but he watched with an expression Isabella had learned to read, the look of a man witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. In 15 years of working for Vincent Marino, Marco had never seen his boss sit with anyone like this. Never seen him offer silence as a gift. At 1 o'clock, a nurse appeared and Isabella's entire body went rigid. Vincent placed his hand on hers without looking at her. The nurse smiled. "Dr. Chen wants to see you both in his office." The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and hope. Oliver lay sleeping under a white blanket, his small chest rising and falling with the ease of a child who would now have decades of those breaths ahead of him. Isabella approached the bed like she was walking through water, terrified that moving too quickly would shatter this moment into something breakable. Dr. Chen stood beside the monitors, his surgical mask around his neck, his eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. The valve replacement was textbook perfect. "His prognosis is excellent. By next week, he'll be able to go home." Isabella didn't remember falling to her knees, but Vincent was there, his hands on her shoulders, anchoring her to the ground as she sobbed, the kind of sobbing that comes only when the impossible reverses itself and becomes real. That night, she returned to the apartment alone and held Thomas's photograph against her chest. The image of her dead husband, smiling at a construction camera 12 years ago, now felt like a bridge between her old life and whatever came next. She kissed his face and whispered thank you into the darkness. 3 days later, everything fractured. Oliver sat in her lap, still recovering, his small hand wrapped around a juice box, watching cartoons in their living room when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, check the Boston Herald online. The headline screamed at her, Mafia boss Vincent Marino bankrolls made suspiciously timed surgery, extortion or love child. Insiders question $200,000 arrangement. The article included doctored photos, her and Vincent standing close, their proximity weaponized into something filthy. Financial documents that looked official but weren't, showing fake wire transfers that suggested she had blackmailed him. A quote attributed to someone called a family insider, "This girl has him twisted around her little finger. He's throwing away millions for her." The byline was Cordelia Blackwood's friend, a society columnist who owed favors up and down Beacon Hill. Isabella's hands shook as she scrolled. The comment section burned with cruelty. Gold digger. Probably sleeping with him. How dare this nobody infiltrate the Marino family? Nobody. There was that word again, sharper now, weaponized. That same afternoon, Marcus found her in the hospital parking garage as she returned to check on Oliver. He emerged from between two parked cars like something that had been waiting to hunt, his face red with rage, his expensive shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "You think you won?" His voice was slurred, acidic. "You think my uncle's sudden charity means something? You're a toy, Isabella. A distraction. When he gets bored, you'll be nothing again." He backed her against her car, his hand gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. His breath smelled like whiskey and bitterness. "I'm going to take everything from you." His fingers dug into her arm. "Starting with that brat in your apartment. Social services loves hearing about unstable mothers. About women who sleep with dangerous men to afford their kids surgeries." Isabella's hand came up on instinct. Her nails found his cheek and she raked downward with everything she had. He screamed, recoiling, and she shoved him hard enough that he stumbled backward into a concrete pillar. "Don't you ever," she breathed, her voice steady even as her whole body shook, "come near my son again." She ran. Behind her, his voice echoed through the garage, cursing, the sound of security guards running, the squeal of tires as cameras swiveled toward the commotion. But the damage was already spreading. By evening, Cordelia made her move on live television. Isabella learned about it from Marco, who appeared at her door holding his phone like it was contaminated. The screen showed Boston's most-watched morning program, live, broadcasting to 300,000 people. A segment titled "Shocking Embezzlement Exposed, Elite Society Unravels." Financial records filled the screen, numbers so large they lost meaning. For $0.7 million. Charitable foundations. Cordelia Blackwood signature on every fraudulent transfer. The camera cut to the green room where Cordelia herself sat watching the monitors, her face draining of color as her own destruction played out in real time. Her mouth opened. Her hands began to shake. "Federal agents are currently executing a warrant at her residence," the announcer said. "Charges include RICO violations, wire fraud, and conspiracy." Within minutes, the video went viral. Twitter exploded. News outlets that had printed her society column for years suddenly ran her mugshot instead. Her phone went silent, not because she'd turned it off, but because every contact she'd ever made had evaporated simultaneously. At 6 in the morning, federal agents arrived at her Beacon Hill townhouse. The cameras caught her in handcuffs, her perfectly maintained hair falling in her face, her designer coat dragging on the ground as they led her to an unmarked sedan. The news helicopters circled like vultures. Her father issued a statement. He barely knew her. The board she sat on held emergency meetings. By noon, she'd been removed from all of them. That night, Isabella sat in her bathroom with the lights off, reading the articles on her phone, watching her name get dragged through everything sharp and cruel. The comments had shifted. Now she was being defended by strangers, held up as a victim, her story spreading across 1,000 platforms. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like exposure. Rain hammered against the bathroom window. She thought about running. About taking Oliver and disappearing into some small town where nobody knew, where they could rebuild without the weight of Boston's attention. She looked at Thomas's photograph in the darkness. His smile, frozen in construction dust and simpler times. A small voice cut through her spiraling, "Mama." Oliver stood in the doorway, his small silhouette backlit by the hallway light, still weak from surgery but reaching for her with those perfect hands. "Why are you sad?" His question was innocent, the logic of a 5-year-old who'd just been given a new heart. "I got my new heart part. We won." Isabella pulled him into her lap, felt his small body against her chest, felt his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. She held him and decided to stay. To fight. To let Vincent do whatever he needed to do in the darkness, because she understood now that some wars were fought in places she would never see. What she didn't know was that Vincent had seen this coming. Marco had been running financial forensics on Cordelia for 6 months. The embezzlement was old, systematic, calculated. $800,000 stolen annually, funneled through shell companies, buried in charitable donations that were never made. Marcus's assault was on camera. 3 separate angles from the garage security system, all of them capturing every moment of his rage, his threat to take Oliver, the force of Isabella's fight back. Vincent had the evidence. He had the footage. He had the witnesses, 3 other women Marcus had cornered, threatened, assaulted over the past 2 years. At 3 in the morning, federal agents with warrants that bore Vincent's fingerprints moved like ghosts through Marcus's penthouse apartment in the Prudential Tower. Marcus woke to flashlights burning through his eyes and the sound of his door being kicked in. He stumbled out of bed in silk pajamas, his voice rising to a scream. "You can't do this. I'm family." Vincent stood in the doorway, his expression carved from ice, his coat hanging open, his hands in his pockets like he was simply observing something inevitable. "You stop being family when you put your hands on her." The evidence was presented with mechanical efficiency. Bank records. Security footage. Testimony from 3 other women, all of them given protection, all of them given lawyers paid for by Vincent. Marcus collapsed to his knees on his 1,000-thread count sheets, trembling like a cornered animal. "Uncle, please, I'll leave Boston, I'll disappear, just don't." "Too late," Vincent said. FBI agent Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for assault, extortion, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The arrest warrant specified 40 years minimum. Meanwhile, Cordelia's trial became a public spectacle. The federal prosecutors didn't need Vincent's help, the evidence was pristine, her crimes catalogued for a decade. But the public destruction was thorough. Every news cycle featured her face. Every society page ran her mugshot. Her father's political connections, carefully cultivated over 40 years, dissolved like salt in water. 35 years federal prison. RICO charges. Asset seizure. Total annihilation. Vincent's justice was not quick death. Too merciful. Instead, it was systematic erasure, the slow, methodical removal of everything that had made them feel powerful. 3 weeks later, Marco brought Isabella to Vincent's study. The walls were lined with leather-bound books nobody read and paintings nobody understood. Vincent sat at his desk, studying a photograph. It was her and Oliver in the hospital recovery room, both of them smiling, both of them alive. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "It's over," he said. "They cannot hurt you anymore." Isabella thought about the rain-soaked night, about her hands shaking as she packed a bag, about the choice to stay. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Vincent said quietly. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." Outside the study window, Boston's lights glowed against the evening sky, indifferent to the small revolutions happening inside its streets. The seasons shifted across Boston like the turning of pages in a book already written. Autumn arrived first, painting the common in rust and gold, and Isabella Winters walked through those falling leaves with a business card in her pocket that bore her name in embossed letters. Operations Consultant. The title still felt like borrowed clothes, like she was pretending to be someone capable and whole. But the paycheck was real. Enough to cover rent without calculating how many days of ramen it represented. Enough to buy Oliver new shoes without checking the clearance rack first. 1 year had passed since the night at the service entrance. 365 days of rebuilding. Of therapy sessions paid for, not out of pocket but through legitimate work. Of Oliver's surgical scar fading from angry red to pale silver, the skin healing over a heart that beat strong and steady. The cardiologist had smiled at his 6-month checkup. "His numbers are perfect. He's going to have a normal life." Isabella had cried in the hospital bathroom for 20 minutes, not from grief this time, but from the weight of that single word. Normal. Winter came next, snow accumulating on the Boston streets, and Isabella completed her online degree in business management. She studied at midnight after Oliver slept, her fingers flying across the keyboard in the small apartment in Back Bay, 3 rooms, natural light, a kitchen where she could cook without fear. The semester's final paper was about organizational resilience. She'd written about systems that hold together under pressure, about structures built to support rather than exploit. The professor gave her an A and a note. Your personal understanding of this subject is evident. Excellent work. The apartment had been a choice, not an accident. She'd walked through 7 different places, calculating not just rent but the quality of light, the proximity to Oliver's school, the sound of the hallways. When she found this one, she'd stood at the living room window and felt something shift inside her chest. Safety. Not borrowed, not temporary. Earned. Marco visited every other Sunday, arriving with chess sets and patience, teaching Oliver strategies and sacrifice, the boy's young mind absorbing the language of moves and consequences. Isabella would watch from the kitchen, pretending to cook but really watching Marco's scarred hands move the pieces, remembering those hands in the darkness, knowing exactly what they were capable of, and yet here they moved pawns across a board with a 7-year-old boy's concentrated frown. Marco never mentioned Vincent. The two of them had created a careful silence around that name, respectful and distant. Vincent sent Christmas gifts, a leather-bound journal for Isabella, a chess set carved from Italian marble for Oliver. The cards were handwritten, brief. For Isabella, I hope the new year brings you everything you deserve. For Oliver, I hear you're becoming quite the strategist. I look forward to a match someday. Professional. Careful. The distance between them had widened into something that felt like respect. Spring brought flowers to the mansion gardens Vincent Moreno had never visited in daylight. The underground poker room closed without explanation. The guns and muscle that had always seemed so central to his operation began a slow, careful transformation. Legitimate real estate developments. Legal investments. Marco noticed the shift first, then Gino, but neither man asked questions. They'd learned long ago that Vincent Moreno's reasons were his own. What they did see, though, was how he looked at the photograph on his office desk, Isabella and Oliver in the hospital recovery room, both of them smiling, both of them alive, for longer each day. Summer heat returned to Boston like an old threat remembered. Humid and pressing, the kind of August night that makes the city smell like asphalt and desperation. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new penthouse condo, the closing papers signed just that afternoon. The space was modest by the standards of the world she'd glimpsed through Vincent, but it was a palace compared to everything she'd known before. 31st floor. Harbor views. Her name on the deed. The photograph was framed now, on the mantel beside Oliver's school pictures. Thomas Winters looked out at the world with the smile of a man who would never see his son grow up, and Isabella had finally learned to remember him without the knife of it cutting through her ribs. He was honored now, not desperate. Passed, not prison sentence. Oliver called from his room. Mama, can Marco teach me chess tomorrow? He said maybe, but I want to ask you. Isabella smiled. If he has time, sweetheart. She didn't hear the penthouse door open. The security system should have alerted her, but Marco had codes. Or someone with Marco's codes did. Didn't hear the footsteps across her polished floor. Didn't turn until Vincent's reflection appeared in the window glass beside her own. Her breath caught in her throat. He stood there in dark trousers and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, no jacket, and he looked almost uncertain in a way she'd never seen. Like a man stepping into territory where the rules had changed without his permission. Vincent. She turned to face him fully. How did you hear Marco has a key for emergencies? This isn't. He let me in. Vincent's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. I asked him to. The humid August air drifted through the open balcony door. Traffic sounds rose from the streets below, the ordinary percussion of a city indifferent to the extraordinary moment unfolding 31 stories above it. Vincent stepped closer. Not threatening. Careful, like approaching something fragile. A year ago tonight, I watched you stand between my nephew and someone weaker. I'd spent 15 years believing that strength meant isolation. That trust was weakness. My own brother taught me that. His jaw tightened. But you stood there with $17 in your pocket and a dying child at home, and you chose to protect a stranger. You had every reason to run. To hide. To save yourself. And you didn't. Isabella's eyes filled. She'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in the shower, in her car, in the dark before sleep. None of those rehearsals had prepared her for the actual sound of his voice saying her name was implied in every word. You saved Oliver's life. You saved my life. Her voice broke on the last word. Vincent shook his head. You saved your own life. I just made sure you had the chance to fight. He stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the emotion he'd carried for a year breaking through the fortress of his face like light through cracks. I've been trying to give you space. To let you build your new life without the shadow of what I am. But I can't, I need you to know. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Family is not always bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. She recognized the words. They settled into her bones like a key finding its lock. You stayed when Marcus threatened you. Vincent's hand rose to her face, gentle, his scarred fingers cupping her cheek where Marcus's hand had struck a year ago. You stayed when the tabloids tried to destroy you. You stayed when you could have run. His thumb moved across her skin, barely touching. I'm asking if you'll stay now. Not as someone I saved. As someone I... He couldn't finish. Couldn't say the word love in his voice, in his world, in the person he'd been before she chose courage over survival. Isabella closed the distance, her hand covering his I'll stay. They stood at the balcony railing as the sun descended toward the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. Oliver emerged from his room and found them there, didn't hesitate before slipping between them, reaching for both their hands. Marco and Gino arrived an hour later for dinner, and the table filled with honest laughter, the kind that doesn't hide anything, the kind built on redemption and second chances. This is what family looks like when it's chosen rather than inherited. When it's built not on blood but on the night someone stood between darkness and light and refused to move. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances and loyalty. Subscribe because we're bringing you another story tomorrow that will remind you what real strength looks like. Comment below, do you believe people can change, or is the past always destiny? We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.